Have you ever wondered about the true story of Ham, the son of Noah? While most of us are familiar with the dramatic tale of the flood, the ark, and the new beginnings after the waters receded, the story of Ham holds mysteries that have been misinterpreted for centuries. His descendants were the architects of some of the most powerful civilizations in history, yet his actions have sparked debates that still resonate today. In this story, we will explore the truth behind Ham's legacy, the curse of Canaan, and how it shaped the world. You won't want to miss the deeper revelations hidden in this narrative. Stay with us as we uncover the lessons that can be applied to our lives today. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss out on more inspiring stories like this one. Now, let's begin. In the days before the flood, the world had become a place of darkness. Evil and corruption had spread far and wide, and humanity had strayed so far from the path of righteousness that God, in His justice and mercy, decided to cleanse the earth. The land was filled with violence, and the hearts of mankind were wicked. It was a time of great despair, where hope seemed lost and there was no one to turn to. But then, in the midst of this chaos, there was one man, Noah. Noah was different. He was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. His heart was pure, his faith unshakable, and his actions in the eyes of the Lord were a reflection of obedience. It was because of Noah's faithfulness that God chose him to carry out the monumental task of building an ark, a vessel that would save not only his family but also the future of all living creatures. Noah's obedience wasn't without its challenges. Building the ark, a massive undertaking, took years of labor, sweat, and faith. Can you imagine the ridicule he must have faced? The people around him, immersed in their wickedness, must have mocked him relentlessly. Yet Noah pressed on. With each hammer strike, with each beam placed, Noah was building not just a boat, but the hope for a new beginning. God had promised that He would preserve Noah and his family, and Noah believed every word of it. And then, when the ark was finally complete, the flood came. The skies opened up, and torrents of rain poured down upon the earth. The waters rose, swallowing everything in their path, drowning the evil that had corrupted God's creation. For 40 days and 40 nights the storm raged, and the earth was covered with water. The destruction was complete. There was no turning back. Every living thing that had the breath of life in it, save for those aboard the ark, perished. But in the midst of this catastrophic event, God's mercy shone brightly. For Noah and his family, the ark became a sanctuary, a place of salvation. It was a symbol of God's faithfulness, His desire to preserve the righteous, and His commitment to the future. As the waters receded, Noah and his family found themselves standing on the threshold of a new world, one cleansed from the corruption that once plagued it. The ark had served its purpose, and now, with the floodwaters retreating, they were given the chance to begin again. But this new beginning wasn't just about survival. It was about the future. It was about what would come after the flood, about the seeds that would be planted for the generations to come. Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, stood by his side, each one carrying the weight of this new world on their shoulders. They were not just survivors, they were patriarchs, the fathers of nations, the builders of civilizations that would shape the course of history. As they stepped onto the earth that was once again dry, they were not simply beginning a new chapter, they were laying the foundation for something greater. They were part of God's redemptive plan for humanity, a plan that, despite the flood, was still very much alive. In that moment, the future of the world rested in their hands. Each step they took would set in motion the destiny of the nations that would emerge from their lineage. But even as Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth looked out upon the world before them, the path ahead would not be without trials. The flood had washed away the old world, but the seeds of rebellion and sin remained, waiting for the right moment to sprout once more. The promise of a new beginning was not a guarantee of an easy journey. but a challenge to rise above the past and walk in faith. The flood waters had barely settled when Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, stepped out onto the dry land. The devastation left behind was unimaginable, yet amid the destruction, there was a divine promise, a new beginning. The world was reborn, but the journey ahead was just beginning. Noah's family, having witnessed God's mighty judgment and mercy, now stood as the progenitors of a new human race. They were more than survivors. They were the founders of nations, the forebears of future generations, each tasked with rebuilding what had been lost. In this new world, the three brothers would each play a critical role in shaping history. As the sons of Noah, they were the seed from which the earth would be repopulated. Shem would father the Semitic peoples, the ancestors of Israel and the tribes that would carry God's promises. Japheth's descendants would spread across Europe, bringing their influence far and wide. But it was Ham, the son whose legacy would be most questioned, whose path would become entangled in controversy and mystery, who became the central figure in the formation of the ancient civilizations that would change the course of history. Ham's descendants, though often misunderstood, were the builders of some of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. The Egyptians, the Kushites, the Canaanites, and the Phoenicians. All these great peoples sprang from Ham's lineage. Egypt, perhaps the most influential of them all, was a land of wisdom, engineering marvels, and unmatched architectural achievements. From the grandeur of the pyramids to the sophisticated systems of governance, the Egyptians, children of Ham, created a civilization that would leave an indelible mark on the world for millennia. Yet, Ham's story is often overshadowed by controversy. The curse of Canaan, his son, has been misinterpreted and twisted over time, leading many to associate Ham's descendants with disgrace. This misunderstanding has caused immense pain, particularly in later centuries when it was used to justify racial discrimination and the horrors of slavery. But what does the Bible truly say about Ham? What was his role in the rebirth of humanity? And how did his actions set the stage for the nations that would come from him? To understand Ham's significance, we must first examine his actions in the aftermath of the flood. After the ark had come to rest on Mount Ararat, Noah planted a vineyard and became drunk from the wine it produced. One fateful night, as Noah lay uncovered in his tent, Ham saw his father's nakedness. This act, though seemingly minor, carried profound consequences. In ancient Hebrew culture, nakedness was not only a sign of vulnerability, but also a symbol of shame. To see someone's nakedness, especially that of a parent, was considered an act of deep disrespect. Yet, instead of covering his father's shame, Ham mocked Noah, revealing his father's condition to his brothers. Shem and Japheth, in contrast, responded with dignity and respect. They took a garment, walked backward into the tent, and covered their father without looking at him. Their actions were a stark contrast to Ham's. They demonstrated the biblical principle of honoring one's parents, a principle that would echo throughout generations. This act of respect, so simple yet so profound, would set the tone for the legacy of Shem and Japheth. Their descendants would carry the blessings and promises of God, but for Ham, his lack of respect had consequences. Noah, upon awakening and realizing what Ham had done, uttered a curse, not upon Ham directly, but upon his son, Canaan. This was a prophecy, a foretelling of the spiritual downfall that would befall Canaan and his descendants, the Canaanites. The curse was not racial. It was a moral judgment, a warning to future generations about the consequences of dishonor and disobedience. This moment in Noah's tent is where the story of Ham and his descendants takes a dark turn. The curse of Canaan would shape the history of the ancient world, and the nations that emerged from Ham's line would be marked by both greatness and tragedy. While Egypt and Ethiopia flourished under the leadership of Ham's descendants, the Canaanites, who would settle in the Promised Land, would face destruction due to their idolatry and immorality. But even in the midst of this complex narrative, there is hope. The Bible is clear that God's mercy is greater than any curse. Even the Canaanites, who were eventually driven out of the land, found redemption through faith. Rahab, a Canaanite woman, would become a symbol of this grace, as her faith saved her and placed her in the lineage of Jesus Christ. As we continue to explore the story of Ham, we see that his descendants were not merely a backdrop for Israel's story. They were active participants in the unfolding drama of human history. The Egyptians, for instance, would play a crucial role in the story of Joseph, Moses, and the Exodus. The Kushites, too, would have their moments of glory, with figures like the Queen of Sheba and the Kushite ruler Ebed-Melech making their mark on biblical history. Through all of this, one truth becomes clear. Ham's legacy is not defined by a curse, but by the nations he helped build. His descendants contributed immensely to the shaping of ancient civilizations, and their influence continues to be felt in the world today. The morning light crept slowly over the horizon as Noah stirred from his deep slumber. His head ached, his body was weary, but something was different. There was a heaviness in the air. He recalled the night before, the wine, the celebration of survival, the moment of vulnerability. But as his mind cleared, a wave of shame and anger overtook him. Something had happened, something that would change the course of history. Noah sat up, pulling the garment over himself as the realization dawned. His son, Ham, had dishonored him. The details of what exactly took place in that moment remain debated, but what we do know is this: Ham saw his father in his nakedness and did not act with honor. Instead of protecting Noah's dignity, he exposed it. He spoke to his brothers, Shem and Japheth, in what many scholars believe to be a tone of mockery. But where Ham failed, his brothers showed reverence. Shem and Japheth took a garment, walked backward into the tent, and covered their father without looking upon his shame. It was a simple act, but one that spoke volumes. Honor, respect, acknowledgement of God's order. These things mattered in the ancient world, and they still matter today. When Noah awoke, he knew what had transpired, and it was then that he spoke the words that would shape history. "Cursed be Canaan. The lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers." Genesis 9:25. This passage has been one of the most misinterpreted verses in biblical history. It has been twisted to justify oppression, misused to explain division, and misunderstood for generations. But what was Noah truly saying? Why did he curse Canaan, Ham's son, rather than Ham himself? First, it is crucial to understand that Noah's words were not an act of personal revenge, nor were they an arbitrary punishment. This was a prophecy, a divine revelation about the future of Canaan's descendants. The curse was not about race or superiority, as it has wrongly been used in later history. Instead, it was a statement about the moral and spiritual downfall of the Canaanites, a people who would later become infamous for their rebellion against God. Canaan's descendants would go on to settle in the land that would bear his name, Canaan, the land that would eventually become the promised land for the Israelites. But instead of walking in righteousness, the Canaanites chose a path of wickedness. They became known for their idolatry, their moral depravity, and their rejection of God's ways. They engaged in practices that included child sacrifice, temple prostitution, and occult rituals. This was not a random curse, it was a forewarning. This prophecy, however, was not a generational curse placed upon all of Ham's descendants, as some have falsely claimed. In fact, Ham's other sons, Kush, Mizraim, and Put, went on to establish great civilizations, such as Egypt, Ethiopia, and Libya, none of whom were included in Noah's curse. The prophecy was specific to Canaan and his lineage, not Ham's entire bloodline. Noah's words teach a powerful lesson that goes beyond the historical implications. They serve as a warning about dishonor and its consequences. In the Bible, honoring one's father and mother is not just a cultural expectation, it is a divine command. Honor your father and mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." Ham's actions were not merely a careless mistake, they reflected a heart of disrespect, and disrespect, when left unchecked, can lead to destruction. This is evident in the fate of the Canaanites. Their moral decline was not a result of Noah's words, it was a result of their choices. They embraced idolatry, forsook God's laws, and eventually found themselves at odds with the very people God had chosen to bring forth His promise: Israel. Yet, as harsh as this prophecy seemed, it was not a permanent condemnation. The Bible is clear. God is a God of justice, but He is also a God of mercy. Even among the Canaanites, there were those who found redemption. Rahab, a Canaanite woman, lived in Jericho, a city doomed for destruction. But when she heard of the God of Israel, she chose faith over fear. She sheltered the Israelite spies, risking her own life, and in return, she and her family were spared. Not only that, but Rahab later became part of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. This story proves an important truth. While sin has consequences, God's grace is always available to those who turn to Him. The story of Canaan and his descendants is more than just a historical account. It is a reflection of choices, consequences, and redemption. It reminds us that dishonor and rebellion lead to destruction, but faith and obedience lead to restoration. In a world that often disregards respect, honor, and spiritual truth, this passage stands as a reminder that our actions have consequences. But it also reassures us that no matter where we come from, no matter what mistakes have been made, redemption is always within reach. The winds of time moved swiftly after Noah's prophecy. His words, spoken in sorrow and forewarning, echoed through the generations that followed. Canaan, the son marked by Noah's curse, grew into a patriarch himself, raising a lineage that would shape the landscape of history in ways both remarkable and tragic. His descendants, the Canaanites, would go on to inhabit a vast and fertile land, a region that would later become the promised land of the Israelites. But their journey would be marked by choices that led to their rise and their downfall. Canaan's descendants spread across the land that bore his name. The Bible provides a detailed account of the peoples who came from him. Canaan was the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Archites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. These tribes became builders of fortified cities, masters of trade, and creators of a distinct cultural identity. They flourished in agriculture, developed vast economic networks, and constructed architectural marvels that stood as a testament to their ingenuity. Cities like Jericho and Sidon became centers of power and commerce, and the Phoenicians, one of the most influential Canaanite groups, pioneered maritime trade, creating a phonetic alphabet that influenced the future of written communication. Yet, despite their advancements, the Canaanites veered away from the moral foundations that could have secured their place in God's redemptive plan. Instead of seeking righteousness, they turned to idolatry and immorality. Their religious practices included the worship of Baal and Asherah, pagan gods that demanded human sacrifices and ritualistic depravity. This rejection of divine truth placed them in direct conflict with the God of Israel. God had given humanity a second chance after the flood. Yet, as history repeated itself, the Canaanites chose to indulge in practices that distanced them from His presence. Their worship often involved child sacrifices, an unspeakable horror in which innocent lives were burned in the fire to appease their gods. This was a society where morality was dictated by self-indulgence rather than divine principles. They built high places for Baal in the valley of Ben Hinnom to sacrifice their sons and daughters in the fire, something I did not command, nor did it enter my mind. Jeremiah 19:5. These actions were not merely religious choices. They were signs of a civilization deeply entangled in corruption. They were a people who had forsaken the Creator for false gods, who had chosen rebellion over repentance. Their spiritual decay ultimately led to their downfall. The Canaanites occupied the land that God had promised to Abraham's descendants. When the Israelites, led by Joshua, finally arrived to claim their inheritance, it set the stage for one of the most significant conflicts in biblical history. God commanded the Israelites to drive out the Canaanites, not out of arbitrary cruelty, but because of their deep moral corruption. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going in to take possession of their land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. The conquest of Canaan was not about racial superiority or power. It was a divine judgment upon a people who had abandoned righteousness. Yet even amid this judgment, God's mercy was evident. There were those among the Canaanites who recognized the God of Israel and sought refuge under his protection. One of the most beautiful and redemptive stories of the Bible is that of Rahab, a Canaanite woman who lived in Jericho. She was not just any citizen. She was a prostitute, an unlikely candidate for divine grace. But when she heard of the mighty acts of God, her heart was stirred. She recognized that the God of Israel was the true God, and she chose to align herself with his people. I know that the Lord has given you this land, for the Lord your God is God in heaven, above and on the earth below. Joshua 2:9-11. Rahab hid the Israelite spies, protecting them from her own people. In return, she and her family were spared when Jericho fell. But her story did not end there. She became a part of Israel, eventually becoming an ancestor of King David and, ultimately, Jesus Christ himself. Her life is a testimony that no one is beyond redemption. Even among those who had turned from God, there were hearts willing to believe, to change, to be saved. Rahab's faith rewrote her destiny, proving that God's mercy extends to all who seek him. Though the Canaanites were ultimately conquered, their influence did not disappear entirely. The Phoenicians, descendants of Canaan, thrived as seafarers and traders, leaving a lasting impact on language and commerce. Their development of an alphabetic writing system became a foundation for modern languages. Even in their downfall, the Canaanites serve as a lesson to history. Their legacy is a stark reminder of the consequences of turning away from God, yet it also stands as proof of his unending grace for those who choose faith over rebellion. The story of Canaan's descendants is not just an ancient tale. It is a reflection of choices that every generation must make. Will we follow the path of righteousness, or will we drift into spiritual decay? Will we, like Rahab, recognize the truth when it is revealed to us, or will we harden our hearts against it? God's judgment is real, but so is his mercy. The fate of the Canaanites reminds us that sin has consequences, but faith can change everything. The sun blazed over the vast desert, its golden rays glinting off the great Nile River. The land was alive with movement. Farmers tending to their crops, merchants bargaining in bustling markets, and towering monuments rising against the horizon. Egypt was a kingdom unlike any other. It was a land of wisdom, wealth, and power, a civilization built by the descendants of Ham, specifically through his son Mizraim. From the banks of the Nile, Egypt flourished into one of the most advanced societies of the ancient world. Their architectural marvels, pyramids that defied time, temples that reached for the heavens, and an intricate system of governance, spoke of a people blessed with ingenuity and ambition. But Egypt was more than just a place of power. It was a land that would play a central role in the biblical narrative, both as a place of refuge and a place of bondage. After the flood, as humanity spread across the earth, Mizraim and his descendants settled in the fertile lands of the Nile. In time, they built cities of grandeur, Memphis, Thebes, and Heliopolis, each serving as a testament to the civilization's advancement. Egypt was known for its contributions to mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and engineering. The Egyptians devised irrigation systems that transformed barren lands into agricultural hubs. They mastered the art of writing, creating hieroglyphics that recorded their knowledge, history, and beliefs. But perhaps their greatest legacy was their architecture. The Great Pyramid of Giza, standing as a sentinel over the land, was built with such precision that even modern scientists are still in awe of its construction. These structures were not just burial sites, they were symbols of human achievement, determination, and vision. Yet, in the midst of their greatness, the Egyptians, like the Canaanites before them, drifted from the worship of the one true God. They built temples to Ra, Osiris, and Isis, fashioning gods in their own image and relying on their own strength rather than seeking divine wisdom. Despite their advancements, their spiritual foundations were built on shifting sand. Egypt first appears in the biblical story as a land of refuge. When famine struck Canaan, Abraham journeyed to Egypt, seeking safety and sustenance. Genesis 12:10. It was here that Abraham, out of fear, introduced Sarah as his sister rather than his wife. This deception nearly brought disaster upon Pharaoh, but God intervened, and Abraham was sent away with great wealth. Later, Egypt became the stage for one of the most remarkable stories of redemption, the story of Joseph. Sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, Joseph was taken to Egypt, where he faced trial after trial. Betrayed, imprisoned, and forgotten, he endured years of suffering. But in God's perfect timing, Joseph rose to power, becoming second only to Pharaoh. His wisdom saved not only Egypt but also the surrounding nations during a time of severe famine. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. Joseph's story reminds us that even in the darkest of times, God is at work. What seemed like a tragedy became a testimony of divine providence. Egypt, for a time, was a place where God's people found refuge and provision. But Egypt's role in biblical history was not only one of refuge, it also became a place of great oppression. After Joseph's time, a new Pharaoh arose, one who did not know him. The Israelites, once honored guests, became slaves. They were forced into harsh labor, building cities for the pharaohs, enduring suffering under the lash of their oppressors. The cries of God's people rose to heaven, and in his perfect timing, he raised up a deliverer, Moses. With signs and wonders, God demonstrated his power to Pharaoh, sending 10 devastating plagues upon Egypt. The Nile turned to blood. Darkness covered the land. Hail and fire rained from the sky. And finally, in the dead of night, the angel of death passed over Egypt, striking down the firstborn of every household that was not covered by the blood of the Lamb. It was then that Pharaoh, broken and defeated, let the Israelites go. The Exodus became the defining moment of deliverance in the Old Testament, a story of God's power, justice, and faithfulness. "Let my people go, so that they may worship me." Exodus 8:1. Even in their suffering, the Israelites were never forgotten. God heard their cries, saw their pain, and moved in mighty ways to set them free. Egypt, once a place of refuge, had become a place of chains. But no empire, no pharaoh, no earthly power could stand against the will of the Almighty. As history progressed, Egypt continued to play a significant role in the biblical narrative. It was a nation of great influence, often mentioned in prophecies concerning Israel and the surrounding nations. At times, Egypt sought alliances with Israel. At other times, they stood as enemies. But ultimately, Egypt, like all human kingdoms, would not last forever. The prophets warned of Egypt's decline. Isaiah foretold a time when Egypt would be humbled, its idols shattered, and its people scattered. Isaiah 19:1-15. Ezekiel echoed this prophecy, declaring that Egypt's pride would be brought low. Ezekiel 36:8. And yet, even in judgment, there was hope. God promised that Egypt would one day turn back to him. Blessed be Egypt, my people, Assyria, my handiwork, and Israel, my inheritance. Isaiah 19:25. This astonishing verse reveals God's plan of redemption, not just for Israel, but for the nations. Even Egypt, despite its history of idolatry and oppression, was not beyond God's grace. Egypt's story is a powerful reminder that no nation, no people, and no individual is beyond the reach of God's sovereignty. It is a story of refuge, rebellion, and redemption. Like Egypt, we are often tempted to trust in our own strength, to build our own kingdoms, and to rely on our own wisdom. But the truth is, without God, even the greatest empires will fall. However, just as Egypt's future held the promise of redemption, so too does our own. No matter our past, no matter our mistakes, God is always calling us back to Him. He is the God of deliverance, the God of justice, and the God of second chances. As we look at the descendants of Ham, we have seen how Canaan's people fell into destruction and how Egypt rose and fell in power. But what of the other nations that came from Ham's lineage? In the next part, we will journey into the land of Kush, the powerful kingdom that played a vital role in both biblical and world history. From mighty warriors to faithful servants of God, the story of Kush is one of both strength and faith. The sun set over the vast golden plains of Africa, casting long shadows over the mighty kingdom of Kush. This was a land of warriors, traders, and builders, a civilization born from the lineage of Ham through his son, Kush. While the world often focuses on Egypt, another great empire thrived just south of it, an empire whose influence reached far and wide, leaving an indelible mark on biblical history. The descendants of Kush were a powerful people. They built cities along the banks of the Nile, south of Egypt, in the region we now know as Sudan and Ethiopia. Their lands were rich with gold, ivory, and spices, commodities that made them one of the wealthiest and most influential civilizations of their time. They were known for their military might, their trade networks that stretched from Africa to the Middle East, and their role in shaping the history of God's people. But beyond their wealth and power, the story of Kush holds something even more profound, a story of redemption, faith, and divine purpose. Kush's descendants spread far and wide, establishing some of the most advanced cities of the ancient world. The Bible frequently mentions the people of Kush, referring to them as a nation of great stature and power. "Are you not like the Kushites to me, O people of Israel?" declares the Lord. Amos 9:7. This passage is striking. God compares Israel to the Kushites, recognizing them as a people of significance. They were not just another ancient civilization, they were part of God's grand design. The kingdom of Kush played a crucial role in the geopolitics of the ancient world. They were known for their warriors, who were fierce in battle, often serving as mercenaries in Egypt's armies. The pharaohs of Egypt valued the strength of the Kushite warriors, and at times, Kushite rulers even sat on Egypt's throne, establishing the 25th dynasty of pharaohs. These Kushite kings, particularly Pharaoh Taharka, would go on to impact biblical history in significant ways. Kush appears throughout Scripture, sometimes as a powerful force, sometimes as an ally, and sometimes as a people used by God for His divine purpose. One of the most intriguing figures from Kush in the Bible is Ebed-Melech, the Kushite servant of King Zedekiah. When the prophet Jeremiah was thrown into a cistern and left to die, it was Ebed-Melech, a foreigner, an outsider, who stepped forward with courage and faith to save him. Ebed-Melech, a Kushite, an official in the royal palace, heard that they had put Jeremiah into the cistern. While the king was sitting in the Benjamin Gate, Ebed-Melech went out of the palace and said to him, "My lord, the king, these men have acted wickedly in all they have done to Jeremiah the prophet. He will die of hunger there where he is." Jeremiah 38:7-9. Despite being a foreigner in Judah, Ebed-Melech was a man of faith and righteousness. Because of his obedience and courage, God blessed him, promising him safety in the coming destruction of Jerusalem. "I will rescue you on that day," declares the Lord. "You will escape with your life because you trust in me." Jeremiah 39:18. This story is a powerful reminder that faith and righteousness are not confined to one nation or one people. God sees the heart, and those who trust in Him, no matter their background, are part of His divine plan. One of the most famous encounters between a Cushite and God's people was the visit of the Queen of Sheba to King Solomon. The Queen of Sheba, ruling over a prosperous kingdom in Ethiopia or southern Arabia, heard of Solomon's wisdom and traveled a great distance to test him with hard questions. She arrived with an extravagant caravan, bringing gold, spices, and precious stones, a testimony to the wealth of her land. But beyond the riches, what she sought was wisdom. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon, she was overwhelmed. 1 Kings 10:4-5. She acknowledged the greatness of Israel's God and left not just with knowledge but with a newfound reverence for the God of Solomon. Jesus himself later referenced her, calling her an example of someone who sought truth. "The Queen of the South will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here." Matthew 12:42. Her story teaches us that true wisdom is found in seeking God. Riches and power may fade, but those who hunger for truth will find eternal treasure. While Kush was a mighty nation, like all earthly kingdoms, it faced both prosperity and judgment. The prophets spoke of Kush's role in world history, sometimes as a nation used by God and at other times as a nation facing divine discipline. Isaiah foretold that Kush would one day recognize God's sovereignty. "From beyond the rivers of Kush, my worshippers, the daughter of my dispersed people, will bring me offerings." This is an extraordinary prophecy. It reveals that Kush would one day turn to God and worship Him. In the book of Acts, we see the beginning of this fulfillment when Philip encounters the Ethiopian eunuch, a royal official from Kush, reading the book of Isaiah. Philip explained the gospel to him, and in that moment, the Ethiopian believed and was baptized. "Look, here is water. What can stand in the way of my being baptized?" Acts 8:36. This event marked the entrance of Christianity into Africa, a faith that would take deep root in the land of Kush. Today, Ethiopia remains one of the oldest Christian nations in the world, a testimony to the enduring faith that began with a single act of obedience. The story of Kush is one of strength, faith, and redemption. They were a people of power, warriors and rulers, but also a people whom God reached out to time and time again. Their history reminds us that no nation, no people, and no individual is beyond God's call. Like Ebed-Melech, we are called to stand for righteousness even when it is difficult. Like the Queen of Sheba, we must seek wisdom that leads to God. And like the Ethiopian eunuch, we must be willing to say yes when the truth is revealed to us. God's plan is not limited to one people or one land. He is calling all nations, from the ends of the earth, to Himself. The desert winds howled across the vast North African landscape, where great warriors once rode under the scorching sun. This was the land of Put, another descendant of Ham, whose people spread across what is now Libya, Tunisia, and parts of Algeria and Morocco. Unlike the towering pyramids of Egypt or the rich gold mines of Kush, the land of Put was defined by its fierce warriors, its trade connections, and its role in biblical prophecy. For centuries, the people of Put were known for their military prowess, often serving as mercenaries in great battles. They were nomads, merchants, and warriors, shaping the history of the ancient world through their alliances and conflicts. Though often overshadowed by their Egyptian and Canaanite relatives, the descendants of Put played a crucial role in the biblical narrative, appearing in prophecies of both judgment and redemption. This is their story, a story of strength, resilience, and the undeniable hand of God shaping their destiny. While the Bible does not give as much detail about the people of Put compared to Egypt or Kush, historical and biblical records confirm that they were a significant presence in the ancient world. Genesis 10:6 states, "The sons of Ham, Kush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan." From this lineage, Put's descendants migrated to North Africa, where they became renowned for their skills in battle. The prophet Ezekiel mentions Put as one of the nations allied with Egypt in times of war. Persia, Kush, and Put were with them, all with shields and helmets. This verse paints a vivid image of the warriors of Put, shield in hand, helmet gleaming in the sun, standing alongside their allies, prepared for battle. The soldiers of Put were sought after by the great empires of their time. Egyptian pharaohs, Babylonian kings, and even Persian rulers enlisted their strength in times of war. But they were not just warriors. The land of Put was also home to skilled traders. Situated along major trade routes, their merchants exchanged goods with the Phoenicians and Egyptians. They dealt in ivory, incense, precious metals, and exotic spices, contributing to the economic networks that shaped the ancient world. Despite their strength and influence, the descendants of Put, like many ancient civilizations, often walked the path of idolatry and rebellion against God. Because of this, biblical prophecy included them in pronouncements of divine judgment. The prophet Jeremiah recorded a dire warning: "The sword will come against Egypt, and anguish will come upon Kush. When the slain fall in Egypt, her wealth will be carried away and her foundations torn down. Kush, Put, Lydia, all Arabia, Libya, and the people of the covenant land will fall by the sword." Jeremiah 46:9. These words foretold a time when Egypt and its allies, including Put, would face divine reckoning. Whether by the hands of invading armies or through economic downfall, their power would not last forever. Yet, even in judgment, God's mercy remained. Though the nations of Ham's descendants often fell into spiritual darkness, God's plan was never to abandon them entirely. Throughout the Bible, there are glimpses of hope, moments when people from these nations recognized the true God and turned to Him. One of the most fascinating aspects of Put's biblical significance is its mention in end times prophecy. The book of Ezekiel 38-39 speaks of a final great battle, where a coalition of nations will rise against Israel. Among them is Put, standing alongside other powerful forces. "I will bring you from the far north and send you against the mountains of Israel. Persia, Kush, and Put will be with them." This prophecy suggests that the descendants of Put will play a role in the unfolding of future events. Whether as adversaries of Israel or as nations caught in the chaos of war, their presence in this prophecy indicates that their story is not yet over. But there is hope even in the darkest times. God's ultimate plan is not just judgment, but redemption. The same nations that once stood against Israel are also included in prophecies of salvation. In Isaiah 19:25, a remarkable vision unfolds. "Blessed be Egypt, my people, Assyria, my handiwork, and Israel, my inheritance." This is astonishing. It shows that God's mercy extends beyond Israel to all nations, even those that once opposed His people. Egypt, Assyria, and by extension, all the nations descended from Ham, including Put, are included in God's divine plan of restoration. The story of Put is a reminder that power and strength alone are not enough. Empires rise and fall. Warriors come and go, but what truly matters is a nation's relationship with God. The descendants of Put were mighty in battle, skilled in trade, and valuable allies to great empires, yet they too faced judgment when they strayed from the path of righteousness. But the Bible does not end with judgment. It ends with redemption. The promise of Isaiah shows that no nation, no people, and no person is beyond the reach of God's love. For us today, this is a call to reflect. What are we building? Are we relying on our own strength, or are we seeking the wisdom of God? Do we stand firm in our faith, or do we drift away, following the ways of the world? The descendants of Put were warriors, but even warriors need a cause worth fighting for. The greatest battle is not fought with swords and shields. It is fought in the heart. It is the battle between choosing God's way or our own. The clash of swords echoed across the valley as warriors stood face to face, the tension thick with the weight of history. This was not just another battle. It was a war between two destinies, between a nation chosen by God and a people who had long been their greatest adversary. The Philistines, descendants of Ham, had carved their place into history, not just through their military might but through their relentless conflicts with Israel. They were strong, fearless, and masters of war. From their mighty cities of Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron, they ruled the coastal lands, wielding iron weapons while others still fought with bronze. They dominated trade routes, controlled seaports, and built an empire that struck fear into their enemies. Yet, despite their power, their story would not be one of everlasting victory. Instead, it would be a lesson in what happens when a people stand against God's chosen ones. The Philistines were not originally from Canaan. They are believed to have been part of the Sea Peoples, a confederation of seafaring raiders from the Aegean region who migrated to the eastern Mediterranean around the 12th century BC. Over time, they settled along the coastal plains of Canaan, integrating into the land and establishing powerful city-states. The territory of the Philistines extended from the Shihor River to the border of Ekron. Joshua 13:3. Their military advancements gave them a significant edge over neighboring nations. While others relied on outdated bronze weaponry, the Philistines mastered ironworking, allowing them to forge superior swords, chariots, and armor. They became the dominant force in the region, and their growing power soon brought them into direct conflict with Israel. From the time of Joshua to the reign of King David, the Philistines remained one of Israel's fiercest enemies. The book of Judges records several battles between these two nations, but none were more legendary than those involving Samson and David. Samson and the Philistines, strength without wisdom. Samson, a man chosen by God, was given supernatural strength to deliver Israel from Philistine oppression. His story is one of promise, failure, and redemption. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands. Judges 14:6. Samson's strength was unmatched, and time after time, he struck down the Philistines. He destroyed their crops, slaughtered their men, and humiliated their leaders. But despite his power, he was blinded by pride and temptation. His downfall came through Delilah, a Philistine woman who seduced him into revealing the secret of his strength. The Philistines seized their opportunity, capturing Samson, blinding him, and imprisoning him. They mocked him, celebrating their victory in the temple of their god Dagon. But even in his weakest moment, Samson turned back to God. With one final plea, he prayed, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please God, strengthen me just once more." Judges 16:28. God heard his cry. Samson, though blinded and broken, brought down the Philistine temple with his bare hands, killing thousands in his final act. His life was a warning, a story of wasted potential, but also of God's ability to redeem even the fallen. David and Goliath, the ultimate underdog. Story, perhaps the most famous battle in biblical history, is the showdown between David and Goliath. Goliath, a giant Philistine warrior from Gath, taunted Israel, challenging them to send a champion to fight him. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. 1 Samuel 17:16. Israel's warriors trembled. No one dared to face him, until a young shepherd boy named David stepped forward. Armed with only a sling and 5 stones, he stood against the towering giant, declaring, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." 1 Samuel 17:45. With a single stone, David struck down Goliath, proving that victory does not belong to the strongest, but to those who trust in God. This moment marked the beginning of Israel's triumph over the Philistines, setting the stage for David's rise as king. Despite their military strength, the Philistines could not stand forever. Unlike Israel, they had no divine covenant, no lasting promise. Their gods were powerless, their victories temporary. Over time, Israel's kings, particularly Saul and David, weakened their stronghold. By the time of the Babylonian conquest, the Philistines had faded into history, their once great cities destroyed, their people absorbed into other nations. The Bible prophesied their downfall. This is what the Lord says: "I am about to stretch out my hand against the Philistines, and I will wipe out the Kerethites and destroy those who remain along the coast." Ezekiel 25:16. What remained of the Philistine people eventually disappeared from history, their legacy reduced to ruins and biblical accounts of their once mighty reign. The story of the Philistines is more than a historical account. It is a warning and a lesson. Strength without wisdom leads to destruction. The Philistines relied on their power but lacked the wisdom to seek the true God. Pride comes before a fall. Goliath mocked God, but it was his arrogance that led to his defeat. Trusting in God leads to victory. David, though small and inexperienced, won because his faith was in God, not in himself. In our own lives, we may face giants, challenges that seem impossible to overcome. But just as David proved, victory comes not from our own strength, but from faith in God. The sands of time have shifted, burying empires and uncovering new ones. But the impact of Ham's descendants, Canaan, Egypt, Kush, Put, and the Philistines, has never truly faded. They shaped the ancient world, built mighty cities, engaged in historic battles, and played crucial roles in biblical prophecy. Though some fell due to their defiance against God, their influence persisted, weaving itself into the fabric of human civilization. As we approach the final chapters of their story, we must ask, what lasting impact did they leave on the world? How have their contributions shaped our understanding of faith and history today? Their story is not just one of judgment, but also of redemption, a testament to the way God works through all people, nations, and generations. From the earliest biblical records to modern archaeology, the descendants of Ham have left a remarkable legacy. The Canaanites laid the groundwork for trade and commerce in the ancient Middle East. Their maritime descendants, the Phoenicians, created the first known alphabet, a system that would influence Greek, Latin, and eventually modern languages. Egypt became one of the greatest civilizations in history, pioneering advancements in mathematics, medicine, architecture, and governance. Even today, the pyramids of Giza stand as a monument to their ingenuity. Kush, Ethiopia, and Nubia played a crucial role in biblical history. From the Queen of Sheba's visit to Solomon to the Ethiopian eunuch's conversion in Acts 8, their faith and influence extended far beyond Africa. Put, Libya, and North Africa contributed to military strategy and trade, interacting with both biblical Israel and later empires like Rome. The Philistines, though often Israel's enemies, left a historical footprint through their advanced metallurgy, governance, and naval prowess. Though these nations had different fates, some flourishing, some fading, each left a lasting mark on human civilization. Their stories remind us that history is not just about power, but about the lessons we take from it. One of the most profound themes in the Bible is redemption. No matter how far a nation or a person may stray, God always extends His hand of mercy. Even among the descendants of Ham, many of whom opposed Israel, God's grace was evident. 1. Rahab, the Canaanite woman who found salvation. Rahab, a resident of Jericho, was a part of the cursed Canaanite people. Yet, when she heard of the God of Israel, She chose to believe. She risked her life to hide Israelite spies, declaring, "The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." Joshua 2:11. Because of her faith, she and her family were saved when Jericho fell. But her story didn't end there. She became part of Israel and later became an ancestor of Jesus Christ. Matthew 1:5. A Canaanite woman, once destined for destruction, became part of the lineage of the Messiah. 2. The Ethiopian eunuch, the first African convert to Christianity. In the New Testament, an Ethiopian official, descended from Kush, was reading the book of Isaiah when the Apostle Philip approached him. After hearing the gospel, he immediately asked, "What can stand in the way of my being baptized?" Acts 8:36. Right then and there, Philip baptized him, and the gospel entered Africa. This moment marked the beginning of Christianity's spread into the continent, a faith that remains strong in Ethiopia to this day. 3. Egypt in prophecy, a nation blessed by God. Though Egypt had once enslaved Israel, the Bible speaks of a future where Egypt will be blessed alongside Israel. "Blessed be Egypt, my people, Assyria, my handiwork, and Israel, my inheritance." Isaiah 19:25. This prophecy reveals God's ultimate plan, not to condemn nations, but to redeem them. No matter their past, all nations are invited into God's family. What can we learn from this story? 1. History is more than just the rise and fall of empires. It is a spiritual journey. The story of Ham's descendants is not just about power. It is about the choices nations made. Some followed God, while others turned away. Those who rebelled faced judgment, but those who embraced faith found redemption. The same is true for us today. Our choices determine our legacy. 2. No one is beyond redemption. The Bible is clear. God does not judge based on race or nationality, but on the heart. The Canaanites, the Egyptians, the Cushites, many were at odds with Israel, but individuals like Rahab, the Ethiopian eunuch, and even some pharaohs turned to God. God does not show favoritism but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. Acts 10:34-35. If God can redeem entire nations, He can redeem you, no matter your past, your mistakes, or your background. 3. God's plan includes all people, all nations. The story of Ham's descendants shows that God's hand moves through all of history. He used the Egyptians to protect Jesus as a child, Matthew 2:13. He sent Philip to preach to a Cushite, Acts 8. He blessed Rahab, a Canaanite, to be in Jesus' family line. The gospel is not just for one group of people, it is for everyone. The echoes of history still whisper through the ruins of ancient cities, across the shifting sands of time. The story of Ham's descendants, Canaan, Egypt, Kush, Put, and the Philistines, is one of rise and fall, of conquest and loss, of rebellion and redemption. But most importantly, it is a story of God's sovereignty, a reminder that His hand is at work in every nation, in every people, and in every life. As we conclude this journey, we must ask, what does this story mean for us today? How does the legacy of these ancient civilizations connect with the modern world? And what lessons can we take from their triumphs and mistakes? This is more than just history. It is a reflection of the spiritual journey that humanity continues to walk, even now. Though many of Ham's ancient nations have disappeared, their influence remains embedded in global history, culture, and even faith. The Canaanites' legacy continues through the Phoenician alphabet, which influenced Greek and Latin writing systems, forming the foundation for most modern languages. Egypt's contributions in architecture, medicine, and mathematics continue to shape the world today. Even the biblical connection to Egypt remains strong. After all, Egypt sheltered Jesus as a child. Kush, Ethiopia, and Sudan has maintained a Christian presence since biblical times, with one of the oldest Christian churches in history still standing strong today. Put, North Africa, saw the rise of civilizations that played a role in both biblical and Islamic history. The Philistines, though long gone, left a footprint in the land they once occupied. The region of Palestine takes its name from them. These ancient people may no longer exist as distinct nations, but their influence has not been erased. God used even the most rebellious nations to fulfill His plan for humanity. Throughout this series, we've seen that many of Ham's descendants turned away from God, but they were never beyond His reach. Time and time again, individuals from these nations were brought into His covenant. Rahab the Canaanite was saved because of her faith, Joshua 2. The Ethiopian eunuch became one of the first African Christians, Acts 8. Ebed-Melech the Kushite was honored for saving the prophet Jeremiah, Jeremiah 38. Egypt was called my people in prophecy, showing God's plan for their redemption, Isaiah 19:25. This proves one undeniable truth. God does not judge people based on their nationality or ancestry. He judges by the heart. From one man He made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, so that they would seek Him and perhaps reach out for Him and find Him. Acts 17:26-27. The invitation of faith is open to all, no matter their history, no matter their past. The history of Ham's descendants teaches us three powerful lessons. 1. God is in control of history. Nations rise and fall, but God's plan never fails. Every kingdom that opposed Him eventually crumbled, while those who turned to Him found redemption. Egypt enslaved Israel, yet later sheltered Jesus during His childhood. The Canaanites were destroyed, yet Rahab became part of Jesus' lineage. The Philistines fell, yet David's victory over Goliath became a testimony of God's power. No matter how chaotic the world may seem, history is in God's hands. 2. Rebellion leads to destruction, but repentance leads to life. The nations that rejected God faced judgment, but those who humbled themselves before Him, like Rahab, like the Ethiopian eunuch, found salvation. The same is true today. God is always calling us back to Him. If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. This is an invitation, not just for nations, but for every person. 3. Your past does not define your future. If God could redeem Rahab, a Canaanite prostitute, if He could save the Ethiopian eunuch, a foreigner searching for truth, if He could use Egypt, a land once filled with idols, to protect the Savior of the world, then He can redeem you too. It doesn't matter where you come from, what mistakes you've made, or how far you've strayed. God's mercy is greater, His grace is endless, and His invitation is for you. As we close this journey through the history of Ham's descendants, one question remains. What will your legacy be? The nations of Ham each left a mark on history, some through destruction, others through faith. You, too, are writing your story. Will you follow the path of rebellion like the Canaanites who perished? Or will you turn to God, like Rahab, like the Ethiopian eunuch, choosing a legacy of faith, redemption, and eternal life? The choice is yours. See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. Deuteronomy 30:15-19. Today, God is calling you to choose life. Choose faith. Choose Him. The story of Ham's descendants is part of a much greater story, the story of how God is redeeming the world. From the fall of nations to the coming of Christ, history is leading toward one final moment, the return of Jesus, when every nation, every tribe, and every language will stand before God. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language standing before the throne and before the Lamb. This is where history is heading. This is where God's plan has always been leading, to a future where people from every nation, including those once lost in rebellion, will worship together in unity before Him. The story of Ham's descendants does not end in judgment, it ends in hope. And that same hope is available to you today. This has been an incredible exploration of biblical history, prophecy, and redemption. If this series has impacted you, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? What part of this story spoke to you the most? And most importantly, if you're ready to start your own journey of faith, reach out. We would love to pray with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring, biblical content that brings history to life and strengthens your faith. May God bless you, and may you walk forward in His grace and purpose.